All right, we are chapter 48.
What page?
I will tell you the page number. We're going to start off with outside. It's going to be on page 613, which is a great page number for a Tanya class because it's all about in performing our mitzvahs and inspiring us in Torah. So definitely a great place to be on. I didn't realize that when we concluded. So 613, awesome. Hard one to forget. But first, we'll start a little bit outside. It's quite quite the chapter. It's filled with, I'm just going to mute everyone just in case. Feel free to unmute yourself. I just hear some background noise. Better. Okay. But feel free absolutely at any point to unmute yourself, ask a question, raise your hand, however you want to. Chapter 48 and 49, which are the next two chapters we're going to be discussing, is continuing along the theme of our inspiration of love for God, the feeling of love that inspires us in our mitzvot. So, of course, doing the mitzvah, doing the deed, which is what we were discussing in chapters 37, 38, even 39, that's the crucial point, getting the job done. But the inspiration, the awe, and reverence, the love and excitement in doing the mitzvah, the intention, the passion behind it is absolutely crucial as well. It's like a soul, it's like a body without a soul, without doing it. So that's what the main theme of the past 7-8 chapters has been. We're continuing along that theme, but we're going to get a little bit deeper in it. So if this wasn't deep for you enough, we're going to get into a very important point. But let me just background a little bit to explain where chapter 48 comes in. If you remember, in a few chapters ago, we brought a verse from the Tanakh, from the Torah, where it says, "Kamayim hapanim el hapanim, kein leiv ha'adam la'adam." Just like water reflects a face, meaning whatever is reflected on the water is the exact reflection that you're going to get back, exactly what you're going to see as a reflection. So too also is the heart of a person. So whatever person shows up with to another, that's what's going to be felt from the other side. It's from the heart. I was doing a shiva a few nights ago, and we really got into the depths of this discussion of the heart of the Jew and the service to God. You know, what does God ultimately want from us? We got into the discussion of the heart, but ultimately, it's proven over and over again that when a person will show up to another with true love, with genuine love, with no expectation other than just loving the person, the love will be felt and will melt the heart of the other. When you show up with love, the love is felt, and the love is then going to be reciprocated. And the example we have given was a king who helps a homeless person by the garbage heap at the end of the edge of the forest, etc., etc. The homeless person feels the incredible love of the king, and he feels, oh my gosh, I love the king back. The love is so deep, and that's really the love that God showed us as well. The love that God showed us, and I'm going a little bit fast over here. I'm like basically wording chapters in just a few words because we've analyzed this at length in the past. But obviously, it's good to bring us up to speed at the beginning of a new chapter. God showed this incredible love when He took us out of Egypt. When God took us out of Egypt, we were like that homeless person, people that had no compass, people that had no guidance, people that were homeless. We had no homes, we had nothing. We were slaves. We were being broken. And God Himself, like we say in the Haggadah, God Himself is the one that took us out of it. God Himself took us out of Egypt. He showed us incredible love, even though we were totally unworthy of it. And I've brought in examples how I proved that we were totally unworthy, where even the angel said, "Who's the Jew and who's the Egyptian?" We were all so steeped in 49 levels of impurity that it was even hard for an angel to be able to do the job, and therefore God Himself had to be the one to take us out of Egypt. And the same scenario took place a week later at the splitting of the sea. We're not going to go through the history, but the point that we're trying to make in Tanya is God showed us this incredible love, and therefore the love that and God gave us the Torah. The love that God showed us throughout that entire process was just absolutely overwhelming and incredible. And therefore, the response back by the Jew is that feeling of love. It's the reflection. It's the automatic reciprocation. Chapter 47, which was last chapter that we learned, was, okay, but that story happened thousands of years ago. So really what we were trying to hone in, the point is that it's not just a story from years ago, Rather, the story of God taking us out of Egypt, God showing us this incredible love, God having compassion on us, is a story that takes place in our daily life, meaning not only in our generation, not only once in our lifetime, but every day we have this ability to feel the love of God and to reciprocate that love. Meaning when we say the Shema, it's that incredible time of meditation of feeling the love that God is giving us and giving us the power, the strength, and the ability to be able to relieve our daily Egypt. So we explained that Egypt in Hebrew is Mitzrayim. So it's not just a geographical location, a country, but it's the word in Hebrew, Mitzrayim, comes from the word Meitzar, which means restraints, constriction. And what God did is he gave us the incredible opportunity to leave our restrictions, to leave our limitations, to leave our confines of our box that we put ourselves in and allow us to reach to a higher level. And every day we could experience an exodus. Every day we are, so to speak, symbolically enslaved in an Egypt, whatever the Egypt is around us, and we have the ability to overcome that Egypt and to leave that Egypt. When we say the Shema, that's the meditation of that oneness of God that we have. And when we feel that God is not just God over the world, but like the 6 words of the Shema is Hashem Elokeinu, God is our God. It's a very personalized experience. It's tailor-made to me. The love between God and the love that God shows is the love directly to me. And therefore the reciprocation is my love back to God.
And the third paragraph of the Shema reminds us that we left Egypt.
And therefore, in the third paragraph of Shema, we have the daily reminder that we left Egypt. Thank you, Shira, because it's not just coincidental. Oh, it's convenient. We have to say the Shema every day. We have to remember the Exodus of Egypt every day, and therefore we do them at the same time in the same paragraphs. Rather, it's so precise because every day we're supposed to leave the Egypt. When we say the Shema, that is the meditation that allows us that daily leaving of Egypt. There was a beautiful there's a story. It's a small little story, but of a great chassid who was a chassid. He lived, at least in the olden days, it was considered a long time. He lived to be the chassid of 3 Chabad rabbis. So he was a chassid by the Alter Rebbe, which is the author of our beautiful Tanya. He was the chassid of his son, the Alter Rebbe's son, who was the successor of the Alter Rebbe, and also a chassid of the next Rebbe, the third Rebbe, who was the son-in-law of the second Rebbe and the grandson of the first Rebbe. His name was Rabbi Menachem Mendel. Our Rebbe is named after him, and I share the same name, Menachem. And he was the third Rebbe. So this chassid, Rabbi Isaac, his name was Isaac Humler. He came from a town somewhere in Russia called Hummel. So he was known as Isaac from Hummel. And he merited to be a chassid of 3 Rebbes. So while he was young at the time of the Alter Rebbe, he was basically the same age as the Alter Rebbe's son. So they were study partners. Before the second Rebbe became the Rebbe, they developed a friendship. Of course, that friendship turned into a chassid and Rebbe relationship when the second Rebbe became a Rebbe. But earlier, they were friends. They would study together. And the Rabbi Isaac says that my friendship took a whole new level, meaning it had a whole new level of respect for the son of the Alter Rebbe when we were on our way to study together and we were walking through a synagogue where we studied at the edge of the synagogue or in the room next to the synagogue. And on the way, there was the Kaddish being said by the people praying, and everyone was responding the Amen. And then after the Amen, there's a Kaddish that we say, and then we answer all together, Baruch et Hashem HaMavorach, which is the phrase that is said and responded by the whole congregation before the Shema, which means blessed is God forever and ever. Baruch Hashem HaMavorach L'olam Va'ed. So when I saw my friend, the Rebbe's son, say those words, just 5 words, but the way he said it, there was an absolute transformation in him. When he said it, just saying the Amen to the Kaddish and saying the response to the Amen, which is blessing God, there was a full transformation that I was able to see in my friend. So I was able to see just how the words of prayer was able to have a absolute transformation in the person. When we say the Shema, the hope is to have a transformation. That's why we close our eyes with our right hand in order to intensify the concentration. So of course, we don't always experience it, and it's a workout. It's supposed to be a spiritual workout during the prayer. But the point is to have that feeling of transformation, that feeling of oneness with God, the feeling of personalizing the relationship between you and God. A person like the Rebbe's son and himself became later the Rebbe was able to have that experience just from saying, responding to the Kaddish. While Rabbi Isaac, who himself was a giant of a chassid, wasn't able to have that full experience like the Rebbe's son. So of course, we're saying that we're supposed to have that experience of the Shema, every person to their level. But the point is, we're supposed to allow ourselves to be refined and allow the message of Shema and the message of prayer to be absorbed within us. Many people, Chabad has and other people have the custom that during the month leading up to Rosh Hashanah, we blow the shofar every day. One of the reasons why we do it is because others just show up to shul on Rosh Hashanah, hear the shofar, and that's the mitzvah. The point of the shofar, the soul of the mitzvah, is in order to inspire us in teshuvah. But for many, just showing up to shul and listening to the sound of the shofar is not enough to inspire us. It may have worked last year, but not necessarily is it automatic that it's going to work this year. You have to train yourself to be able to, and open yourself up to be able to listen to the message of the shofar. And therefore we have the custom to blow the shofar for a month leading up to Rosh Hashanah, almost like a spiritual preparation for the shofar blast on Rosh Hashanah to be able to have its impact. I was at a shiva a few nights ago, and God willing, we're going to Israel with several people on the Zoom and in person. We're going to be going. I think we're like 15 or 16 people going together to the Holy Land in March, and we're very, very much looking forward. But at the shiva, I was talking about Israel. I forgot how it came up exactly, and someone said that they went to the Kotel and they didn't feel anything. The hope is you go to the Kotel and history is coming to life. You see the highs, the lows. You see you feel the temple. You feel the holiness. That's the hope. That's what you want to feel when you go to the Kotel. But this person said they touched the wall and they just didn't talk to them. And obviously I didn't talk to them at the time. But for most of us, just like anything else that we do, you can't just show up to a place and expect miracles to happen. You got to do the work in advance. Just like if you want to be able to bench press, I don't know, what's a big number of bench press? 200 pounds?
200, 300 pounds.
You probably do 300 pounds already, Thomas.
No.
So whatever, you can't just expect one day to be able to bench press 200 pounds. You start with 20, you go up to 30, and it takes a few years to run the marathon. You're not going to do it in a day. You're going to do it in a year. It takes a year of practice. So the same is also with showing up to the wall. It's about the preparation, the refinement that you do to yourself to allow that. Just parenthetically, God willing, I'll be sending out an email hopefully today that we're starting a class about the Holy Land of Israel. It's called Survival of a Nation. It's going to be starting on a Tuesday evening, January 24th. It's a 6-week series. Whether you're going to Israel or not, it brings you a whole new lens of the Holy Land through the experience of the 6-day war. So it's a really incredible course that was actually put together by the JLI. So for those that attended my JLI course, Journey of the Soul, I got a tremendous feedback and people asked me to continue other similar classes from the JLI. So we'll be doing that about the Holy Land of Israel starting in 2 weeks. So I definitely suggest it's going to be on Zoom also. So in case that was going to be a question coming up, it's going to be recorded as well for those that sign up for the course and just are missing one or two. So I definitely recommend looking at the email that God willing will be sent today and signing up for the course. It comes with a book that will belong to you as well. And you'll get more information about it. But the point that I'm trying to bring is you always have to let me take questions first. Yes, Lynn.
What is the time that
It's going to be in the evening, 7:30.
Oh, good. Yes, thank you.
You're
I get
welcome.
back to them about then, so.
Okay, perfect. Okay, awesome. So you'll do the physical workout and then you do your spiritual workout. Awesome. So back to the point over here is the Shema is allowing you to reciprocate the love back to God, feeling the love from Hashem and allowing it to be returned. But you have to be somewhat refined in order to feel the love and in order to be able to return the love. if a person is desensitized or if a person is numb, you're not going to be able to do that. So obviously, just even studying Tanya once a week or really studying any Torah, is allowing that refinement. And hopefully from there you learn to build. And if you've been learning Torah, once a week for several years, that's a personal Egypt that you're in. Obviously, it's a beautiful thing, but you're limiting yourself to once a week. If you're already used to once a week, you got to push the envelope and make it twice a week, or it's even an extra just 5 minutes, or adding. It's always about adding in our study, adding in our daily Jewish regimen. Okay, but that will take us now to chapter 48. We're in chapter, and I took my time to be able to bring us to where chapter 48 starts, because if you even just look at the title of the chapter on 613, it's called Tzimtzum. So for those that have been attending my class of Tanya for a few years, we've touched on Tzimtzum in the earlier chapters very, very briefly, but in like chapter 20, 21, which were also very deep chapters, we touched on the topic or the concept of Tzimtzum. And the Alter Rebbe is going to make it very clear that Tanya is a practical guide. So in other places of Hasidus, Tzimtzum and Kabbalah, Tzimtzum is elaborated in incredible detail. And I'll explain to you briefly what it is. But the Tanya is going to make it clear that this is not the place to analyze Tzimtzum. Over here, the point of bringing up the idea of Tzimtzum is to make it relevant in my love for God. But we're going to use Tzimtzum to allow that meditation to come forth, but we're not analyzing the details of Tzimtzum. So I'm going to give you a brief idea of Tzimtzum. It's obviously in no way going to be a full analysis of Tzimtzum, but we're going to bring the point in order to be able to allow the topic of the chapter to come forth. So it's a pretty deep chapter, because the theme of the chapter is Tzimtzum, but not for Tzimtzum just as an enjoyable topic. It's the Tzimtzum. The point is to make it practical. What does Tzimtzum have to do with my love for God? And that's going to be the point. All right. So Tzimtzum is an Aramaic word. Well, actually, it's Hebrew also. Litzamtzem. It means to contract, to condense. So I'm going to be using the Hebrew word a lot, Tzimtzum, but just to understand, to compress something, to concentrate something, or to condense. Yeah. Okay. Something like that. The point is that God had an infinite light everywhere, meaning there wasn't a world yet, but because there was infinite light of God. God is infinite, and therefore the light of God was infinite as well. The question is, how from infinity is there able to be finitude? How could you get from an infinite place to become something finite? It just doesn't add up. If you think of in terms of numbers, the Alter Rebbe is going to bring, when you have an infinite amount of numbers, the number 1 or 2 is, what does it mean? When you have the number billion, the number 1, even if it seems insignificant, it plays an important role in the number a billion, because if you take off 1, you don't have a billion anymore. Whereas when you have infinity, the number 1 billion doesn't really make a difference, because you have an infinite amount of numbers. So what's a bigger distance, or what's more distant from each other, or unfathomable? 1 to a billion, or a billion to infinity? Billion to infinity is a farther range of a difference. There's no comparison between a billion and an infinity. Whereas 1 to a billion, even though it's such a far off number of a difference, but there is still similarity. Both of them are a defined number, and you need 1 in order to get to a billion. So it's unfathomable. It's unfathomable for an infinite light to become finite. It's something that we can't wrap our minds around, similar to trying to figure out how to fit the water of a Olympic-sized swimming pool into a shot glass. How do you take such a massive amount and bring it and distill it into a glass? How do you take an infinity amount of light and somehow contract it and bring it into a world. So the only way that can happen is by the process of tzimtzum. Tzimtzum means that God compressed his light, or in other words, and this is a little more controversial in Kabbalah, it's one of the biggest debates in Kabbalah. God, so to speak, removed his light, his infinite light, to allow space for there to be a world. And just that topic of removal of light is it's a matter of debate. It doesn't mean like a vacuum that it became fully empty. It means more of a concealment, that God strongly concealed his light, because of course God is everywhere. So God never could remove light, but it's more, let's say, a deep level of concealment. And in fact, in Hebrew, the word for world, which is olam, if you ever heard of the word olam hazeh or olam haba, which means this world, the next world, but the same word in Hebrew for world is also the same word for concealment. The word halem or lehalim it comes from the same root as olam, which means world. Lehalim means to conceal, because in order to get this world, God had to, so to speak, conceal his light. And in fact, it's not even just this world, it's all worlds, because there's other spiritual worlds. We're the lowest of worlds, but all of it would not have been able to come into existence if not for this idea of tzimtzum, that God, so to speak, contracted his infinite light in order for there to be the allowance of worlds to come out. Because even when we talk about angels, and in a previous chapter recently, we talked about the mere levels of angels in every world, and how they are like an army, like a battalion, I think is the word we said about angels. But even when we talk about angels, however spiritual they are, they could only come into being, into existence, as a result of tzimtzum. When God only had his infinite light, there wasn't the allowance for there even to be angels and souls. It had to come only as a result of tzimtzum. So that's going to be the main theme of chapter 48. It's going to go a little bit deeper, if this wasn't deep enough, to explain that there's two levels that God had to condense his light into. One is called Sovev. We're not going to get into the details, but just the general idea is Sovev and Memale, which means encompassing light of God and the filling light of God. If you ever said the Kadosh prayer that we do in synagogues during the Amidah, the repetition of the Amidah, we say, God is holy, Kadosh, 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 Shem Tzvakot, God of hosts, Milo Kol Haaretz Kavodo, that God's light or God's glory fills the entire world. So that's talking about the light of God that is filling the world. But there's also a light that doesn't fill the world, rather it just encompasses from above. And to explain that a little more, there has to be a light energizing the world, but it remains a little bit aloof from the world. But then there's a light that fills the world, which means there's the light that energy of God that gives life to the cow and to the blade of grass and to everything else, has a vitality and an energy from God. But it has to be tailor-made for that creation. So number one, it has to be distilled in order to be able to come into a creation. But number two, it also has to be condensed even more to be tailor-made for this, whatever it is. So for example, the energy in a rabbit that's giving vitality for the rabbit is a different energy than what a cow needs. It has to be tailor-made for that. Or the vitality that God has in our power of vision is different than because a person could have eyes but not see, right? It's coming from the power of vision that is a light of God that he puts in us to be able to hear and see, etc. It's a light of God that is tailor-made for vision, for hearing, or for the blade of grass. So it has to be tailor-made. So that's another level of tzimtzum in order to contract the light to be tailor-made for the different levels of creations. So that's a little bit deeper, but the point is going to be, and this will already segue into chapter 49, why are we talking about tzimtzum here? The point is going to be, if tzimtzum process is the only way, or let me rephrase it, since it's unfathomable for for it to be from an infinite God or the infinite godly light to become and create a finite world. And the only way that can happen is only through Tzimtzum, which means God had to, so to speak, restrain himself, hold back, or conceal his light. As much as God loves giving, God had to hold back in order for there to be an allowance, in order for there to be a creation. Because if God was always shining his infinite light, we wouldn't be able to exist. The world wouldn't come into fruition.
It's an act of love.
So exactly. So the Tzimtzum, in fact, is God's holding back, is actually God's way of loving. Or let me rephrase it in other ways. We should empathize with God. Look what God had to do in order for there to be an allowance of world. God had to make Tzimtzum, however uncomfortable that would have been for God. And of course, this is anthropomorphic speaking, because nothing's uncomfortable for God. God is infinite. But if you could relate to this idea that when a parent loves giving to their child, loves showing love, but as an act of discipline, or really to guide the child to become a mensch, they have to show discipline sometimes. It could be hard for the parent because I just want to smother them with kisses. But the right mode right now is going to be more discipline. So God restraining himself or holding back, it's hard for him. So if we empathize with God, that Hashem had to conceal his light, to the point, how far did Hashem go in concealing his light? To the point that me and you, and so much of us around, could have the impression that God doesn't exist. It's God forbid to say it, but it's such a natural question that I get all the time. Prove to me the existence of God. Meaning God concealed himself so strongly that an act of God could not seem like an act of God. It could just seem like regular nature. We could always question, because that's how deeply God had to make the concealment, to the point where we could feel that we created ourselves. We come from ourselves. All this is just our doings and modern day science or whatever else. So God had to make that space within himself to allow for there to be a relationship with him, for allow there to be a space that we could enter and have a relationship. And this relationship is for us within a body, and not for a soul outside of a body. They can appreciate this relationship. It's all made for us. The Tzimtzum was made for the way we are in this world. So anyway, I'm talking a lot, but the point is, when you come to that, that will help you in reciprocating the love that you have for God. When you come to this understanding and appreciation of what God had to do in the Tzimtzum, will come to a deeper level of reciprocating the love. So the theme is the same theme as we've had in the past few chapters, which is the meditation on the love of God, and therefore the point is the reciprocation of the love. But now we're going a layer deeper using Kabbalah, which is the concept or the matter of Tzimtzum. But the point is not just the enjoyment of talking about these Kabbalistic idea, it's the practical level of it, that since God had to do it, Tzimtzum, which should allow a reciprocation of the love if we empathize with God, and it allows us to love God deeper. Okay, any questions? Okay. Let me just go there.
So I have a question.
Yeah, sure.
There was light before there was the sun, moon, and stars, right?
Yeah.
So this whatever light, eternal light, effusal light, I've heard it called Or HaGanuz. How would you relate that? Is that more God's overall power and light that then had to be focused into ways that we could that it could be used for us, like the sun, moon, and stars? Or like how do you relate this, eternal light? He created light like almost immediately. He said there was light and there was, so
There's a lot to talk about on that. And I'll tell you, even before that light, there was a place of darkness. I'm not even talking about in the world. Before there was a world, Kabbalistically speaking, it's taken from a blessing we say in the blessings of the Shema, Yotzer Or Uvarech Chosha. God formed light and he created darkness. And we learn a lot from there, and from a chapter of chapter 18 of the book of Psalms, where it says, Yashet Choshech Sisro, that God saved or originally had a hidden darkness. So even before that light, that hidden light, the oreganos that you're talking about, there was a place of darkness, but absolutely the light was that level. God wanted that level of light to come into the world, and as long as that light existed, Lynn, this place felt like the time of Mashiach. God then had to hide the light. That's why it's called ganuz, which means hiding, in order for that to happen. I want to reference one thing all the way back in chapter 1. I'm just going to mention, he talks about the level of light. If you go back, and no pressure on going back, but I'll just, he talks about it in chapter 1. Anyway, maybe not for a different time, we're already in a pretty, a subject that needs itself quite intense analysis. But yeah, there's a lot to talk about on that light. Where does that light come in? That light, still had to go through a tzimtzum in order for it to be counted as a light. So even though it was a deep level of light, it was still through tzimtzum, if I'm not mistaken, Lynn. Okay, but we're going to now continue inside. I'm going to pause every now and then just to make sure we're up to speed and making sure we're on the same page. But let's at least try to cover section 1 in our opening class on chapter 48. So here we go. We're going to be on page 613 on the screen as well. Actually, yep, you can see now. You should be able to see. The paradox of the tzimtzum. Section 1, why diminishment of God's light is crucial. Chapter 48 continues a series of discussions extending from chapter 46 to chapter 49, related to the subject of mirroring God's love. So I've been using the translation of reciprocating, but mirroring is obviously the same idea. In chapter 46, we learned that the heart naturally and instinctively mirrors love, as face reflects face in water, so the heart of man to man, which is from King Solomon in Proverbs or Mishlei. The Tanya has offered us various reflections on God's love for us, so that our hearts might mirror back that love to him. In chapter 46, we considered how God's love shown to us at the Exodus from Egypt was like a great king lifting a lowly man from the dirt, bringing him to the palace and showering him with hugs and kisses. In chapter 47, we learned how, spiritually speaking, the Exodus is relevant every day, since it represents the ongoing opportunity gifted to us from God for personal liberation. In this chapter, we will discuss another dimension of God's love for us, how he made the effort, so to speak, to diminish his infinite light to enable us to exist. So again, it's continuing the theme of reciprocating love. And over here, we're going to just delve into a deeper layer by using tzimtzum, by diminishing his infinite light, allowing us to exist, and that should reciprocate a great love for us. Let's see how it works. Now, when an intelligent person will contemplate the greatness of the blessed infinite one, so the Alter Rebbe is speaking to us. If you're already up to chapter 48, with all the background we've been discussing, at this stage, we're already, like the Alter Rebbe says over here, an intelligent person. Meaning we already have this contemplation of the greatness of God. And as this name suggests, right, the name Blessed Infinite One, what does that suggest? That there is no end, finality, or limit whatsoever to the light and energy emerging from him. The intelligent person will realize what a huge gap separates an infinite God from this finite world. Before continuing our discussion, Tanya briefly clarifies an important point regarding this metaphor of God's light, which is commonly used in Kabbalistic works. Right, if you wanted to refer to godly energy in this world, the way in Kabbalah it's referred to is light. There's different analogies. It could be like a flow, a godly flow of energy, like water that flows. But the more accepted one is godly light, like the one we're all familiar with. The Kabbalists referred to the metaphor of God's light therefore he says over the terms such as flow or influence, because light stresses a direct connection and continuity with its source. The light is united with his essence and being in complete unity, just as the light which emerges from a bulb is clearly connected with its source. So when you have, for example, water, not necessarily is the water connected to the source. When you drink bottled water, A lot of times it would say taken from the source. I don't know if this one in front of me says it, but if you look at Arrowhead, it always says modeled at the source, but it's not at the source anymore. Light is much more clearly defined that it's always connected to the source. You can't have light if it doesn't have the source. It always has to be connected. So the Kabbalists prefer the usage of the term light because it shows its direct connection with the source. Unlike influence, which not necessarily has the connection, and flow also doesn't show that connection as much as light. But just as a light bulb doesn't choose to emit its light, the term God's light could also send the mistaken impression that God was somehow forced to emit this energy, right? When a person shines a light, the bulb is forced to shine it. It doesn't really is not really given much of a choice. So a person may think godly light is also, so to speak, God's being forced into shining. So that, he says, is a fallacy, and that's not true. To correct any such impression, the Tanya stresses that God's light emerged intentionally through his non-composite will. Now we return to our main theme, the problem of a finite world emanating from God's infinite light. And if the spiritual worlds had unfolded from the blessed infinite light without any radical diminishments, the radical diminishment is going to be referring to Tzimtzum. But if godly light, infinite light, would have come to this world without Tzimtzum, without a diminishment, and the creation of the spiritual and physical worlds would have only followed a sequential cause and effect process where each phase is relative to the next, this world couldn't have been created at all in its current limited and finite form. Okay, I want to pause here for a moment. The wording over here, is cause and effect. I just want to explain what that is. In Hebrew, the term is, and I'm just hovering it over with my mouse. I don't know if you could see, but let me, I'll get I have a wand over here I could use. In Hebrew, the term is Ila v'alul, or in English, we're referring to a sequential cause and effect process. So I just want to explain everything in our world is a cause and effect. That's how we relate to it. The point that he's going to try to make here is if God would have created the world through a cause and effect process, the world would never have existed. A cause and effect means, let me try to find good examples. Everything we do is a cause for another effect to come out. And this we see in everything. When you plant, that causes an effect of flowers to come out or tomatoes to come out. When I work, it causes the effect of being compensated for what I'm doing. When I hurt, it causes the effect of triggering trauma to someone or hurting someone's feeling. Everything is a cause and effect. Even what we make, what we accomplish, is a cause and effect process. Let me try to find better examples. If a person goes to therapy, a good therapist, what they're trying to uncover is the cause for why a person feels this way. It might have been the slightest thing that happened when they were little, but it caused them tremendous trauma as they were growing up. So a good therapist is trying to find the cause of what that caused the effect. And if you could nurture that, it could change the effect. A chicken is the effect of an egg. Everything comes from a cause and an effect, as long as it has a similarity to the other thing. So if you take a seed, even if it could look like it has nothing to do with the apple tree that came out as a result, but that's still a cause and effect, even though it seems so vast and different, tremendously different. But the cells or the DNA of the seed has in it the ability to bring out an apple tree. And I can prove that to you because it can't make a cow. It's the specific cause that could bring out that effect. It also can't make a peach tree. It could only make an apple tree. And so too also a chicken could only give birth to an egg of another chicken. It can't give birth to another animal or fowl. It's all related to that. It has to have a cause and effect. There has to be some similarity between them. And because there has to be some similarity that allows the next thing to happen, if the world would have continued through this cause and effect process, or if godly light would have continued through this cause and effect process, the world would never have been able to have happened. Because as long as God's light is infinite, and that continues and progresses in the same infinite light, a finite world can never come from there. There's no similarity there. That's not a cause and effect anymore. So in order for there to be from an infinite God to a finite world, it can't follow the method that we know, which is cause and effect, that everything could come from the other thing. A tree could come from that seed. So even back to the cause and effect, a 20-year-old adult, you would have no understanding of how it comes from this embryo. But there still is that same property that allows that baby to be born and allows them to grow. Because it still follows the cause and effect. There still is that similarity. When God created the world, if it was always with a cause and effect process, the world would never have been able to have come. We needed to make a massive holding back of God's light that holds God's, restrains and condenses God's light in order for there to be an allowance of world. So at this point, it wasn't able to be a cause and effect process. That's what he's trying to say in this paragraph. It had to be, I just want to bring out the words I'm trying to, what I'm focusing on over here. Let's just read that paragraph. And if the spiritual worlds had unfolded from the blessed infinite light without any radical diminishments, and the creation of the spiritual and physical world was have only followed this sequential cause and effect process, which is all relative, it all comes from the other, this world couldn't have been created at all. Nothing could have happened if it just would have followed the process of sequential cause and effect. If everything was relative to the other, which is in Hebrew called Ila va'alul, this world, and really we're going to find out soon, all worlds would not have been able to have existed because infinite light wouldn't allow anything finite to come out. So one level after another could only happen as a sequential cause and effect. But as long as you have infinite, there's no level. There's no cause and effect. It doesn't allow, there's no relative to the next. It's everywhere. All right, so I hope that was clear. That's just a very important Kabbalistic theme that we're going to be focusing on a little bit. So this idea of Ila va'alul, or sequential cause and effect, wouldn't allow finite worlds to happen. And therefore we need Tzimtzum, which is a radical diminishment of God's light that doesn't follow a similar pattern. It is a radical diminishment. And then you could get to this world. So again, the main thing is you have infinite light. You wouldn't get to finite or finitude. You have to have tzimtzum, which is a radical diminishment, and only then could the light of God, now that it's finite, be able to come out. And I will just add one more point to this. But let's take a question first. Yes, Lynn.
So, Rabbi, if
Yeah.
we're not sequential, if it's not ordered, if it's not this, then that, and not sequential,
Yeah.
then we're really talking about the realm of mysterious or miracles. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's even beyond miracles. We're talking about the level of God's essence. So, and this is it's just such beautiful Kabbalah. There was the place. I'm not even going to call it a level, and really you can't call it a place because a place is limited in size, at least the way we relate to it. Anything limited in size is not infinite anymore. But God had his light that was essential, that was quintessential. It was all-encompassing. It was infinite. But God had a desire for there to be humanity, for there to be worlds, and specifically for there to be us. So therefore, God had to hold back his light. It was called the makim panoi in Kabbalistic terms. God so to speak, or I'm going to put this in quotes, made a vacuum where there was an empty space. And from that empty space, God made a tzimtzum, allowing God's light to come out of this infinity. And then here's another important term called hishtalshalut. It comes from the Hebrew word shalshel, which means a chain. So once there was God's tzimtzum, once the light was had a tzimtzum, then we were able to have a chain, the cause and effect, continuing down and all the way till our world. So when you look at a chain, the links on the chain, even if one is all the way at the top and the other is all the way at the bottom, there still is a similarity where you get from one link all the way down to the last, from the top to the bottom. But they have a similarity. So once there was a tzimtzum, then there was still a very intense level of God's light. The only difference is the light now was a finite light. It was a level. And from that extremely powerful level of God, God was able to continue contracting to the point where down the chain, we're able to get to this world where things are physical. But if you go to the higher world, which we've talked about of Yetzirah, it's less physical, it's more spiritual. If you continue to the world of Bria, which we're going to be talking about in a moment, where you have Gan Eden, the Garden of Eden, it was almost all spiritual. And then if you go even to the higher world of Atzilus, and even beyond that, we're not going to go through the levels, but this is what Kabbalah basically focuses on, is all the levels of Hishtalshalut. Trying to reach, through your mitzvah, you reach to Atzilus and beyond, you tap into God's infinity. And the highest of levels that, is beyond Tzimtzum that we're going to be relating to is what's known as the crown of God. In Hebrew, it's called Keter, which is where the will of God comes, and that's where our will comes from. And we all know that if a person wills something, it could inspire them to do it. The action follows the will. And therefore, so much of what we're trying to tap into is the will of a person. Because when you tap into the will, which is metaphored in the crown, which is a very appropriate metaphor because the crown is above the person, is even above his mind. Because that's where will comes from. It's what's beyond that you're able to then tap into the, right? If you have a student, but they don't want to learn, they can have the best brain, but you can't force them. They have to want it. There has to be a will. But if there's a will, they could do anything. A lot of people would ask the Rebbe, what should I study? And the Rebbe would always quote a Talmud, meaning what part of Torah should I study? And the Rebbe said, it has to be a place that you desire, a place that resonates with you the most, because you have to want it. It has to come, and then you could open and absorb the messages. I guess I'm getting a little off topic, so let's take a question. I think Shira has a question here. Yeah.
Comment. So our world isn't the first world. There was the world of Tohu and
Yeah, we're the
Okay.
lowest world,
Yeah.
exactly. Any other questions?
Yes, I had one. So this sounds to me, it keeps resonating as Jacob's ladder, where the angels were going up and down, but there was an open um, uh, um,
To the heavens.
port through the
Yes.
heavens, and where the information or the whatever was then brought down to earth. Whether I've seen some people talk about it as actually DNA or all kinds of things, but is this kind of what we're talking about?
Yeah, I mean, it's all the Torah. That's really what's beautiful is in Torah. Everything is going to be related to each other, and really Hasidus, and the Rebbe gave a beautiful talk about this that is way beyond the scope of Tanya. But Hasidus, which is the dimension that the Baal Shem Tov introduced, and especially through Chabad, its job is not to bring out a different dimension of Torah. It's to show you the link between all dimensions of Torah, how they all converge as one. So it's a new light. But when you have a light, you see how everything fits in so perfectly. So that's really what Hasidus's job in Torah is to illuminate Torah, all dimensions, and then you just see how it's all coming from the same source. So really, Lynn, what you just said and what Shira was saying is exactly that point. Shira is talking about a deep level, a deep world called Tohu, where it's chaotic, where there is so much light of God, but not enough vessels to contain the light, and therefore there was almost like a spiritual nervous breakdown. The energy of Esav, which was Jacob's evil twin brother, came from that very, very high level. And that's why, let's say Isaac, it says Isaac favored Esav. He loved Esav more than Jacob because he saw this incredible power of light that was almost unworldly, almost somewhat related to beyond Simpson. And he really wanted to tap into it because that's the highest level of light. And therefore, Jacob also tried to make peace with him and try to tap into it. But ultimately, what did Jacob say? You're not ready. When they met with the 400 men, what was the pinnacle moment? Esav said, let's travel together. And Yaakov said, we'll meet up with Mashiach. We're not ready. When Mashiach comes, we'll be able to meet up. We'll be able to reunite. Because at that moment of Mashiach is when we'll be able to fully access that power of the infinite light. So definitely, Lynn, the idea of Jacob's ladder is so going to be related, right? Because he had that dream when he was running away from his brother. So it's obviously all going to be incorporated. And that's the beauty of Chassidus, trying to bring it all to life and showing how it's all one Torah. It's not fragmented parts. Let's try to just finish a little more over here. We're going to finish section 1. So here we go. If you start with an infinite light, or toward the bottom of the Kindle page, and then diminish it. So if you have infinite light, we're going back to the Simpson. If you have infinite light and then diminish it by any percentage, you will still be left with infinity, right? No matter how much you diminish, if it's infinite, it's still infinite. However, many relative changes you would make, you would never transform the infinite to be finite, to the finite. And we see that the universe is finite. And here's just quotes. It's not literal years, and it's not literal miles or kilometers, but it's obviously on a spiritual level. But here's just quotes that bring out this point. A journey from the earth to the firmament, meaning to the sky, takes 500 years. And so too between each firmament and the one above it. And so too the thickness of each firmament, there are 7 spiritual skies, and the vastness of each one is massive. But still, it's within a level or within a range of years, spiritually speaking. While the Talmud stresses the immensity of the universe, it also defines and limits it. There still is a finite layer to that firmament. Obviously, we're not talking about on a physical level, on geographical. It's not like you could take a faster rocket ship and get there sooner. It's all on a spiritual plane, but showing you that there's a finite layer to it. A journey of 500 years is certainly a vast one, but it is finite. And even the world that is coming, meaning the future world and the upper chamber of Gan Eden, which is heaven, where the souls of great tzaddikim dwell, are limited and finite. And the disembodied souls themselves, and it goes without saying, the angels are limited and finite. So I mentioned this earlier. All souls, and no matter what level of Gan Eden they're in, there's a finite place that they are in. It's not infinite. And we know this because there is a limit to their comprehension of the blessed infinite light, which shines to them through the limiting filter of Chachma, Bina, and Das. And consequently, there is a limit to the pleasure they get from basking in a ray of divine presence and enjoying God's light, because they can't actually receive pleasure and enjoyment directly from the infinite one without their sense of independent existence being voided, which would cause them to return to their source in God. And finally, the Talmud stresses that the souls receive only a ray, or in Hebrew, the word is a ziv, of the divine presence, indicating that their experience is highly limited and filtered. And 2 reasons are given for this. Number 1, the souls access this light through comprehension, which is limited. And 2, if they were given more light, their individuality would be erased and they would simply dissolve in God. Let's just finish the end of the section and then just finalize this. There is nothing then in any of the spiritual or physical worlds that is truly infinite. So in order for God's infinite light to be received by the worlds, a radical diminishment of the light was necessary, which we will discuss in the next section. So I don't know if when you woke up this morning, if you thought you're going to be going into the depths of Kabbalah and understanding the Tzimtzum, and really the point of this chapter is not to just impress you with Kabbalah. It's in order to bring out a very specific point that we didn't yet get to inside, but the theme is how to relate Kabbalah, or how to relate the Kabbalistic idea of Tzimtzum into my reciprocal love for God. But the point that we've been making, just to wrap up the class, is that as long as something is infinite, you can never get to a finite without something radical of a diminishment in the light. And yeah, we'll keep it at that for now. All right, we finished on time still, even with all that Kabbalah. Good. All right, everyone, have a great day. Have a safe travel, Nancy. Pretty impressive that even with travels, you're still committed to learning Torah.
Yeah.
It actually says, even in the heavens, there's a verse that says, the Torah is not in the heavens. And that's really what Moses' claim of why it has to be brought into this world. So some people look at that as a loophole, that in the heavens, we don't have to study. But I'm glad to see that's not the case. Awesome. All right, everyone, have a great day, and we'll see you, God willing, next week. Stay dry, stay safe, stay healthy.
Shalom, shalom. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.